My unfaithful wife was cheating with her ex, and when she snuck home at night after another secret meeting with him, I finally caught her red-handed. Hey Reddit, my name is Tyler, and I'm 29 years old. The rain had just stopped, but the road still looked like black glass, reflecting the dim streetlights in wavering patterns. I was sitting in my car with the engine off, watching condensation crawl up the windshield like fingers trying to escape from something unseen. The whole neighborhood was asleep at this ungodly hour, with every porch light dark except for mine, which I had deliberately left on. Then I heard them. Her heels clicking on the wet concrete like tiny hammers driving nails into my skull. I forced myself not to move, didn't even dare to breathe as I watched her approach our house. She didn't notice my car parked across the street, didn't look around like someone who had secrets to hide. But she definitely had secrets. That much was becoming painfully clear. She was walking like she was floating, moving with that particular grace that comes after a perfect night full of drinks, laughter, and someone else's bed. The way she carried herself told the whole story. This wasn't a woman coming home from work or from hanging out with friends. This was a woman coming home from a hookup, and she was doing absolutely nothing to hide it. I watched as she unlocked our front door and disappeared inside. I waited exactly 10 seconds, counting them off in my head, then followed her in. She had come home at sunrise from her rendezvous, and the moment I flipped the lights on, she froze completely in the middle of our living room. She was standing there holding one heel in each hand, her hair completely messed up in a way that spoke of passionate hands running through it. Her eyeliner was streaked down her cheeks like black wax, creating dark rivers that told their own story. The dress she was wearing was wrinkled and sticking to her legs in ways that suggested it had been hastily put back on. But what really caught my attention was the jacket she was wearing. It definitely wasn't hers. It was clearly a man's coat, expensive looking and far too large for her frame. My presence didn't register with her at first. She blinked against the sudden brightness, looking confused, and maybe even a little dizzy from whatever she'd been drinking. Then her eyes found me, and I could see the exact moment when reality crashed back into her world. I was sitting in my armchair, not slouched or relaxed like I usually was when watching TV. Instead, I sat with my back straight, both feet planted firmly on the floor, my palms flat against my knees. I probably looked like I was about to deliver judgment, and honestly, that's exactly what I was preparing to do. Surprised, I said, letting the single word hang in the air between us. Her face went completely blank for a second, as if her brain was struggling to process what was happening. Then something flashed in her eyes, maybe guilt, but only for a split second before it twisted into a look I'll never forget. It wasn't shame, it wasn't panic, it was just pure irritation, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience in her perfectly planned evening. "What the hell, Tyler?" she hissed, dropping her shoes onto the floor with a loud thud that echoed through our silent house. "Are you spying on me now?" And there it was. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to even pretend she had a reasonable excuse for coming home at sunrise wearing another man's clothes. Just that same tone Nicole always used when I forgot to buy oat milk or left dishes in the sink. Like I was the one being unreasonable. She started taking off the coat like absolutely nothing had happened, already walking toward the stairs as if this was just another normal night. "Don't," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the quiet. "Don't take another step." She turned around with her arms crossed, cocking her hip to one side and looking at me like I was a toddler having a tantrum. The condescension in her posture was so familiar, so perfectly Nicole, that it almost made me laugh. Almost. "Really? What are you even doing?" she asked, her voice dripping with that particular brand of disdain she'd perfected over the years. I stood up slowly, taking my time, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. "I've been awake all night tracking your phone," I said, watching her face carefully for any crack in that mask of irritation. "Watching the miles stack up on that app you forgot you shared with me. Then I saw you stop at the hotel off exit 23, room 318. You stayed there for 6 hours. I paused, letting those details sink in, watching as her expression shifted from annoyance to something harder to read. "Want to try explaining again?" She didn't even blink. If anything, her expression grew colder, more defiant. "You're pathetic," she said flatly, her words hitting me like physical blows. "Spying on your wife like some obsessed creep." That word, wife, hit harder than anything she'd done tonight. Because over the last few months, that word had been slowly dying in my mouth every time I said it. Every cold shoulder, every late night at work, every sudden shower when she came home smelling wrong. It had all been adding up like evidence in a case I didn't want to solve. And I had swallowed it all, convinced myself it was just a rough patch, that maybe she was going through something and just needed space. But no, she hadn't been going through anything except a carefully orchestrated double life. And now she stood there staring at me like I was the problem, like I was the one who had destroyed something precious. I reached down and picked up a black lace bra that I had strategically placed on the side table earlier. I had found it tucked in the backseat of her car, and it definitely wasn't her size, not even close to being hers. Holding it up between us like a piece of damning evidence, I asked, "Whose is this?" She narrowed her eyes at me, her expression shifting into something calculating and dangerous. "That's not mine," she said without missing a beat, her voice steady and confident in a way that told me she'd been preparing for this moment. "You planted it there, didn't you?" she continued, and that's when it really hit me like a freight train to the chest. This wasn't just denial. She hadn't just been caught off guard and was scrambling for an explanation. No, she had rehearsed this entire scenario. She had planned to deny everything, to flip it around completely and gaslight me into thinking I was the crazy one. This was the same manipulation she'd used before in smaller arguments, the same pattern I'd been too trusting to recognize. She was ready to do it again, but this time the stakes were our entire marriage. But this time, I wasn't the same man she'd been slowly breaking down over the months. This time, I had the full picture spread out before me, and I was just getting started with what I knew. She stood in our living room surrounded by the kind of silence that feels like the calm before a storm. Her arms were folded across her chest like a kid who'd been caught sneaking out, but there was zero shame in her posture, just pure defiance. The clock behind her ticked past 6 a.m., and I could hear the distant hiss of early morning traffic from the highway, the world slowly waking up while ours was falling apart. Nicole wasn't flustered at all. She wasn't scrambling to explain anything or trying to come up with believable lies. She just looked inconvenienced, like this confrontation was an annoying interruption to her carefully planned schedule. "You really want to do this now?" she muttered, tugging at the hem of her dress like she was already bored with the entire conversation. "No," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I wanted to do this months ago." I pulled a small voice recorder from my back pocket and hit play. Her voice echoed through our living room, slightly muffled by whatever pillow she had been speaking into when she recorded it. "Stop, baby. Don't wake up the neighbors again," came her breathy whisper, followed by, "No, not there. My husband might see it." Then there was laughter, moaning, the unmistakable sound of skin slapping against skin, and more moaning that made my stomach turn. I watched her jaw clench tight as the recording played, but she said absolutely nothing. Her face remained a mask of cold defiance, refusing to give me the satisfaction of seeing her crack under the weight of her own words. That recording was only 14 seconds long. I'd had enough integrity not to listen past that point, but those 14 seconds contained everything I needed to know. I had found it on a second phone, the one I'd pulled from the glove compartment of her car after she came home from yoga last weekend, wearing her leggings inside out and carrying no yoga mat. That phone had told me everything I needed to know and more. I had spent hours going through text threads with contacts saved under names like Dr. M and Client 4 inches, except there was no doctor, and there certainly wasn't a fourth client. Those were just code names for the real contacts: Blake, Vincent, and another one simply called K. The deception ran so deep that she had created an entire false world on that device. She crossed her arms again and leaned against the wall, her posture radiating nothing but contempt. "So what? You dig through my stuff now?" she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "You're turning into a real creep." I stared at her hard, trying to match the face I had married with the voice I'd just heard whispering dirty promises into someone else's ear. There wasn't even a flicker of apology in her expression. She wasn't just unashamed. She was proud. It was like looking at a complete stranger wearing my wife's face. "Are you going to keep pretending?" I said slowly, letting each word hang in the air between us. "That this is my fault?" She rolled her eyes dramatically, like I was asking her to explain something painfully obvious to a child. "You don't get it. You never got it," she said, her voice taking on that lecturing tone she used when she wanted to make me feel small. "You've been here in this house like a ghost, obsessed with your little projects, your designs, your clients. Always home but never present." I couldn't help it. I actually laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. "That's rich," I said, shaking my head. "You disappear 3 nights a week, come back smelling like cologne and cheap bar soap, and suddenly I'm the one who wasn't present." Her voice cracked then, not with sadness, but with pure, undiluted fury. "I was lonely, Tyler," she snapped. Like that explained everything. Like that justified months of lying and cheating. "You weren't lonely," I shot back, my own anger finally breaking through the surface. "You were lazy. It was easier to find someone new than fix what we had." That broke something inside her. Nicole dropped the coat she'd been holding and stormed toward me with a venom in her voice I hadn't heard since the night we fought about her deleting messages from her ex. A fight that now made perfect sense in hindsight. "Oh, don't you dare act like I ruined some fairy tale," she hissed, getting close enough that I could smell the alcohol and unfamiliar cologne clinging to her skin. "You've been living in your perfect little illusion for years, and I was done playing house with a man who doesn't make me feel alive anymore." My throat burned like I'd swallowed acid, and my stomach felt like it had swallowed a bucket of nails. There was no room left in me for sadness, just pure, overwhelming disgust at the person standing in front of me. She turned away, still raging, her words coming out like bullets. "You think you're the victim? Wake up. You were just a pit stop in my life, a long, boring detour." She said it so easily, so casually, like she had practiced this speech in front of a mirror. Like she had been waiting for the perfect moment to deliver these words that would cut the deepest. Then she walked upstairs without another word, not a tear in sight, nothing but cold silence. The sound of the bedroom door slamming shut echoed through the house like a chapter ending, except I wasn't ready to close the book yet. The sound of her door slamming didn't echo through the house. It stabbed short and final, like a punctuation mark on everything we'd just said to each other. But the damage had already been done long before that door closed, probably months before this night ever happened. I stood there feeling like I'd just been punched in the stomach and then handed a manual on how to pretend it never happened. I didn't follow her upstairs. I didn't move at all, actually. I just stood there staring at the spot where she had been standing when she told me I was nothing more than a detour in her life. 7 years together. Vacations we'd planned together. Birthdays we'd celebrated. Shared bank accounts. Late nights whispering about baby names on the couch during thunderstorms. All of it reduced to a pit stop. Something disposable that she'd tolerated until something better came along. I walked into the kitchen with my hands shaking, sat down at the counter, and tried to process what had just happened. The coffee machine still had yesterday's grounds in it. Hers, always too strong, always left for me to clean up afterward. I stared at the blinking red light, probably for 10 minutes, maybe 20. Time seemed to be melting around me, and I couldn't get a grip on anything solid. Then I heard the sound of her feet again, calm now, descending the stairs like nothing earth-shattering had just occurred between us. Nicole reappeared in the kitchen, dressed in one of my hoodies. Like that meant something, like she was trying to send some kind of message. Her hair was tied up in that casual morning bun, the same one she used to wear when we made pancakes on Sundays back when we still did things like that together. She was holding her phone, and she wouldn't even meet my eyes as she spoke. "You're not going to start calling people, are you?" she said flatly, like she was asking me to pick up milk on the way home. "Calling people like your mom, your friends. I don't need the drama. We can be adults about this." I almost choked on my own spit. "Oh, you think this is a clean break?" I stood up so fast that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You think you can vanish for the night? Come back dripping in someone else's sweat. Call me a detour and we just what? Shake hands and go to brunch with separate checks?" Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she glanced down at the screen. She didn't even bother to hide it from me, didn't try to angle it away or flip it face down. "Is that him?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the way she was holding the device. She smirked, that same cold expression I was starting to recognize as her real face. "Don't be childish." Right then, I knew with absolute certainty that there wasn't just one. The way she said it, the way she held that phone like it was more honest with her than I'd ever been allowed to be. It wasn't just a fling. This was a lifestyle, a carefully constructed parallel existence that I'd been completely shut out of. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to grab the phone or demand to see who was texting her. I just asked one simple question. "How long?" She looked up at me for the first time that morning, and something twitched across her face. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was just annoyance at being asked to admit the truth out loud. She sighed heavily, like I was forcing her to do something exhausting. "Since March," she said. It was July. "March!" I repeated the word like it was some kind of bad punchline that I didn't quite understand yet. "For months." "Tyler," she said impatiently, like I was being deliberately slow about grasping something obvious. "With who?" I pressed harder, my voice gaining strength as the full scope of her betrayal began to sink in. How many? She turned away from me, and there was that silence again. That damn hallway clock ticking like a timer, counting down the death of everything we'd built together over 7 years. I'm not doing this with you, she said, already walking back toward the stairs like this conversation was over, simply because she decided it was. I followed her this time. How many? Enough, she snapped, spinning around to face me with fire in her eyes. Enough to make me realize I didn't miss you, not once, not for a single second. Her words cut through me like razors, each one deliberately chosen to cause maximum damage. She could see the pain written across my face, and I realized with horror that she wanted to see it. She was feeding off of it. I was done with you months ago, she continued, her voice quieter now but still sharp as broken glass. I just didn't feel like explaining it to someone who still thought we were living in a Nicholas Sparks movie. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. What could I possibly say to that? What response could there be to someone telling you that your entire relationship had been a lie for months? She took a step closer to me, getting right in my face. You want to be the victim, Tyler? Fine. Go be the sad guy. Go cry into your throw pillows. Tell your friends how your evil wife lied to you. But you weren't exactly a prize either. She turned back toward the stairs, then climbed halfway up before tossing one last grenade over her shoulder. And don't forget, you're the one who married a marketing girl. I know how to spin this story before you even figure out how to talk about it. Just like that, she was gone again. Not out the door this time, not to another man's arms, but she just vanished into the bedroom upstairs like she owned the place, and I was some unwelcome guest who'd overstayed his welcome. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go to work the next day either. I just sat in the living room like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse from the inside, except the rubble was made of wedding photos, shared bank statements, and 7 years of carefully folded lies that I'd been too trusting to unfold. Upstairs, she went about her morning routine like she was on vacation. I could hear her shower running, her voice humming, drawers opening and closing in that familiar rhythm. At one point, I heard the blow dryer running, then the usual sounds of her getting ready for her day. It was her normal morning routine, but nothing about any of this was normal anymore. She walked back downstairs around 10:30 a.m. with a bag slung over one shoulder and sunglasses perched on her head like she was heading out for mimosas with the girls. She didn't even glance in my direction as she breezed past toward the front door. Where are you going? I asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. Out, she said, checking her reflection in the mirror by the door, like this was just another Tuesday. You don't need to know the details anymore, remember? You're still wearing the hoodie of a man you don't miss, I muttered, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She turned halfway around and smirked at me with that cold expression that was becoming her default. That's because it's soft. Don't get sentimental about it. She left just like that. Door closed, car started, and gone. I sat in that crushing silence again. But this time, it didn't feel like the world was collapsing around me. This time, it felt like the beginning of a war. The numbness was finally wearing off. And as the fog began to clear, what I was left with was something sharp and focused. It wasn't anger. Not yet anyway. It was something much colder and more dangerous. It was resolve. I stood up from that couch and walked upstairs to our bedroom. The room still smelled like her perfume, that expensive stuff I'd bought her for her birthday last year. Her side of the closet was half empty now. She'd packed some things while I'd been downstairs processing the wreckage of our conversation. Some clothes were gone, a few pairs of shoes had vanished, and the jewelry I'd bought her for our anniversary last year was nowhere to be found. But there, sitting on the dresser like a cruel joke, was the framed photo of us in Venice from our 3rd anniversary trip. We looked so happy in that picture, so completely unaware of how this would all end. It felt like it was mocking me now. I opened the drawers on her side of the dresser, looking through what she'd left behind and what she'd chosen to take with her. Everything left behind seemed to be things she wanted to forget about. Everything she'd taken with her, those were the things that actually mattered to her. The pattern was becoming clearer with every drawer I opened. In the bottom drawer, I found her journal. Now, I'd never been the kind of guy to read someone else's private thoughts. I'd always respected boundaries, always trusted that there were some spaces that should remain private between married people. But this wasn't about privacy anymore. This was evidence. This was the unfiltered version of events, the one she wouldn't be able to twist, spin, or polish for my consumption. I flipped to the last pages, my hands trembling as I read entries that made my stomach turn. March 15th. Kay again. Can't believe how easy it is to feel alive with him. Don't even flinch when I lie to Tyler anymore. Maybe that makes me horrible. Maybe I just don't care. March 29th. Told Tyler I had a migraine. Truth is, I had rooftop drinks, then went to his place afterward. The things he does to me. God, I forgot how much I needed this. April 11th. Sometimes I wish Tyler would just find out. At least then I'd be free of all the pretending. I sat on the edge of our bed and reread those entries, my hands trembling and my vision swimming with a mixture of red-hot rage and complete disbelief. She had wanted to be caught. She had practically invited it. She'd been chronicling her affairs like they were some kind of summer romance novel, not the slow, deliberate poisoning of our marriage. But I didn't cry. What I felt was something far worse than heartbreak. I felt absolute clarity. And with that clarity came a question I hadn't dared to ask myself until that moment. What was I still doing here? Not just in this house, not just in this marriage, but inside this version of myself. This quiet, passive, endlessly trusting man who had let his wife write the ending to his story with someone else's hands all over her. That guy was done. He'd served his purpose, and now it was time for someone else to take the wheel. But this wasn't just about leaving. This was about the transition from heartbreak to strategy, from victim to someone who takes control of his own narrative. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. Once the tears dry up, you start seeing everything in clean, surgical lines. You stop feeling and start calculating. Not because you've become heartless, but because you've been carved open so completely that now you're studying the anatomy of what went wrong, piece by piece. Nicole thought she had complete control of this situation. She thought she had all the angles covered. My silence, my loyalty, my reluctance to believe she was capable of something this devastating. But that was before. That was when I was still the man who trusted her completely. I decided to call Natalie first. Not to tattle or cause drama, just to confirm what I already suspected. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice as casual as I could manage. "Weird question, but did Nicole stay over at your place last night?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Natalie choosing her words carefully. "Tyler, no," she said slowly. "She hasn't stayed here in, I don't know, months. Why are you asking?" "No reason," I said, though I was sure she could hear the weight behind those words. The questions started flowing from her side then, but I wasn't ready to answer them yet. Not until I had everything lined up exactly the way I needed it to be. I spent the next few hours digging deeper, methodically pulling up our shared bank statements, her Uber receipts, and credit card transactions. Hotel charges in the city on nights when she said she was working late. Restaurant bills for 2 people when she claimed to be grabbing a quick bite alone. The digital trail of her deception was extensive and damning. I wasn't just building a case against her. I was reclaiming the story that she'd been writing without my knowledge or consent for months. When she got back around 4 p.m., she walked in carrying a smoothie like she'd just been running normal errands. She dropped her keys in the dish by the front door with that same casual attitude, like she'd just had a rough day at the office instead of spending hours with another man. She didn't even look in my direction as she moved through the house. "Where'd you go?" I asked from my position on the couch, keeping my voice neutral. "Out to see Kay," she replied without missing a beat. That casual admission made her pause just slightly, like she was testing the waters to see how I'd react. Then she rolled her eyes dramatically, as if my questions were beneath her dignity. "Still on that," she said, walking toward the kitchen like this was all getting tediously repetitive. I stood up slowly. "I read your journal." That stopped her cold. She turned around like someone who was trying very hard not to show how hard they'd just been hit. "You went through my things," she said. But there was something different in her voice now, less confidence, more calculation. "You went through our entire life," I replied evenly. "Tore through it like it meant absolutely nothing to you. Don't lecture me about boundaries when you've been crossing every single one we ever established." Her face twisted with that familiar anger. "You are unbelievable!" "No," I said, stepping closer. "You are. You wrote about hoping I'd find out. You said you didn't even flinch when you lied to me anymore. You documented your hotel visits while I was at home designing the nursery we never got around to starting." Her mouth opened, but for once, nothing came out. Then something flickered across her expression, but it still wasn't guilt. She looked like a cornered animal, not someone who was finally feeling remorse. "That was private," she finally managed. "You lost the right to privacy the moment you started living a completely secret second life," I said firmly. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. Then, with almost no emotion whatsoever, she said, "So what now? You going to throw me out? File for divorce? Take half the stuff I don't even care about?" And there it was. The real Nicole, completely unmasked. Not the woman I'd married, not the woman who used to whisper, "I love you," under the fairy lights we'd strung up in our backyard. This was the woman who looked at me now like I was nothing more than a burden she was finally done carrying. I didn't yell. I didn't plead or beg her to reconsider. Instead, I walked over to the side table with deliberate calm and pulled open the drawer. I placed a thick stack of printed bank statements on the counter between us, along with screenshots and hotel receipts that told the complete story of her secret life. She looked down at the papers, then back up at me with something approaching genuine surprise. "What is this?" "Everything," I said simply. "Everything you threw away." Then I added, letting each word land with precision. "And everything I'm about to use." Because this wasn't the part of the story where I begged her to stay and work things out. This was the part where I reminded her what consequences actually feel like when they're delivered by someone who's finally done playing games. She didn't speak for a long time after that. The papers sat there between us like evidence at a crime scene. Hotel receipts, text message logs, a complete map of her second life printed out and laid bare with surgical precision. Her eyes scanned the documents, but her face remained blank, refusing to give me the satisfaction of seeing any real reaction. "So now what?" she finally said, her voice carrying a note of defiance that didn't quite mask the uncertainty underneath. "You're trying to scare me?" "No," I said with perfect calm. "I'm letting you know that I'm not the fool you thought I was." She gave a bitter laugh and stepped back from the counter. "God, Tyler, you're pathetic. All this effort for what? You think you can embarrass me into being sorry?" I didn't move an inch. "No, Nicole, I gave up on sorry a long time ago. I just want you out." The words hung in the air heavier than either of us had expected them to. She blinked, and for just a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not sorrow exactly, but hesitation, like a chess player who had just realized they'd lost their queen and might not make it to the endgame after all. "You're kicking me out?" she asked, her arms folding defensively as her voice grew sharper. "This is my house. My name's on the deed. Yours isn't," I said matter-of-factly. "You moved in when we got married, remember? So yes, you're leaving." She scoffed loudly, but there was something forced about it. "You really think I can't make your life hell? You want to play legal games, Tyler? I can drag this out for months." I nodded slowly, like I'd already considered that possibility. "You could try, but if you do, your little adventures with Kay and your hotel escapades become part of the public record. I have enough evidence to walk into any lawyer's office in the city and make sure you walk out with nothing." Her face twitched then, the kind of involuntary reaction that happens when someone who's used to having the upper hand finally feels the floor shifting beneath their feet. "You don't have the guts," she said, but her voice was quieter now, less venom and more uncertainty threading through her words. "You never really knew me," I said, stepping forward slightly. "You knew the version of me that tried to love you through everything, through your cold spells, your gaslighting, your manipulations. But that guy died somewhere between your third lie and your fourth affair." She looked away for the first time in this entire confrontation, the first time she didn't have a comeback ready and waiting. "Where do you want me to go?" she said, and for the first time she didn't sound angry. She sounded like someone who wasn't used to not having a backup plan. I shrugged with deliberate casualness. "You seem to have no problem finding places to stay for the last 4 months. Ask one of them." She laughed, but it was dry and completely humorless. "They weren't meant for that. They were just distractions." "And I was what?" I asked. "The safe fallback?" She didn't answer that question. Instead, I watched her walk past me toward the stairs, but something fundamental had shifted in her posture. She wasn't walking with that same proud confidence anymore. Her steps weren't as sharp, her shoulders weren't as straight. For the first time, she actually looked like someone who might be leaving. When she turned at the top of the stairs to look back down at me, I didn't say a single word. Because I realized in that moment that there was nothing left to say between us. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a countdown. She didn't leave that day. Not really, anyway. Instead, she went upstairs and shut herself in the guest room. The one we never used, the one with the bare mattress, old dresser, and fading yellow paint from when it used to be our storage room. She didn't slam the door this time like she had before. She closed it quietly, like a retreating army closing the gate behind them. For the next 48 hours, our house went completely silent. We moved like ghosts, sharing the same space. operating on separate staircases with carefully staggered movements. I used the downstairs bathroom exclusively, while she stayed mostly confined to the guest room, only creeping out occasionally to grab food from the kitchen or to stand in the backyard for 5 minutes at a time, chain smoking in a hoodie she hadn't worn since college. She didn't speak to me during those 2 days. Neither did I speak to her. But I watched quietly from the windows, because despite everything that had happened, she wasn't actually packing. Her shoes were still lined up in the closet, her bags remained untouched, and her endless collection of serums and makeup products sat exactly where she'd left them. She hadn't called any movers, there were no cardboard boxes appearing, and there certainly wasn't any kind of goodbye preparation happening. She was waiting. She thought I would eventually cool off, that I'd get tired of the oppressive silence and the weight of such a massive decision. She didn't believe I actually had the nerve to follow through with ending our marriage and pushing her out of the house we'd shared for years. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt you, it fundamentally hardens you in ways you didn't know were possible. On the third morning, I left a manila file folder on the kitchen table before heading out to work. I knew she would see it there, and I knew she'd open it. Inside was a formal separation agreement, along with a proposed split of our assets. It wasn't generous, but it wasn't cruel either. Just fair, professional, and completely cold. I didn't include a note with it because I didn't need to. The paperwork said everything that needed saying. When I got back from work that evening, she was already waiting for me in the kitchen. The file was open in front of her, and she had a glass of wine in her hand. The same expensive wine we'd bought together for our anniversary last year. She'd uncorked it like some kind of bitter joke. She didn't look up when I entered the room. "You really did it," she said, speaking more to the wine than to me. "You're really going through with this?" I didn't answer her question. There was no point in stating the obvious. She swirled the wine in her glass slowly, watching the dark liquid move in lazy circles. "And here I thought you were just throwing a fit. I thought you'd get over it like you always do." "You thought wrong," I said simply. She smirked with that familiar bitterness I'd come to recognize as her default expression. "You know what's funny? I used to imagine how this would go if it ever came to this point. I thought I'd be crying or screaming or something dramatic like that." I leaned against the counter across from her, waiting for her to finish whatever point she was trying to make. "But you don't feel anything, do you?" she continued, finally meeting my eyes. What I saw there wasn't emptiness or regret. It was offense, like I had somehow robbed her of the ending she'd wanted to this story. "You think I'm the villain in this story?" she said, her voice taking on that lecturing tone again. "You made sure to paint it that way. But I needed something more, Tyler. Something you stopped giving me a long time ago." "I gave you everything I had," I replied evenly. "You just stopped valuing it." She set her wine glass down too hard, and a little splash landed on the separation papers. The red stain bloomed over the typed words, "separation agreement," like blood on a contract. "Fine," she said with finality. "You want out? You'll get your precious divorce. But don't pretend this makes you noble. You're not some victim rising above it all. You're just bitter that you weren't enough for me." I stared at her for a long moment, letting her words settle between us. "You know what's actually sad?" I said quietly. "You could have just left. You could have looked me in the eye 6 months ago and said it was over. I would have been hurt, sure, but I would have respected you for being honest." She didn't respond to that, just watched me like she was memorizing this scene for later use. I stepped away from the counter. "Instead, you gutted our marriage in slow motion. You lied to my face every single day, laughed with other men while I cooked you dinner, and now you're angry that I'm not crawling back and begging you to stay." She said nothing, just continued to stare at me with that calculating expression. I turned and walked toward the hallway. "I want you out by Friday," I said over my shoulder. "I've already talked to my lawyer. If you're not gone by then, I file everything publicly." She didn't try to stop me from leaving the room, but I heard her whisper as I climbed the stairs. "You always wanted to be the good guy, Tyler. Let's see how long you can keep that up when you're all alone." That's when I realized something important. She hadn't just destroyed our marriage, she was actively trying to drag me down with her as she went. Friday came faster than I had expected. I watched the calendar like a fuse burning down. 3 days, then 2, then 1. On the final morning, I woke up to the same oppressive silence that had filled our house for days. Her things were still scattered throughout the closet like nothing had changed. I didn't feel surprised by this anymore. She had packed a suitcase the night before, sure, but it was just one bag. Her shoes were still lined up perfectly in the closet, her phone charger was still plugged in by the nightstand, and her makeup bag was still sitting on the bathroom sink. It looked like she had just stepped out for groceries, not like someone who was preparing to leave permanently. She wasn't planning to actually leave. Not really. When I got back from work that evening, I found her in the kitchen again, holding the same glass of wine and wearing the same dress she'd worn to my brother's wedding 2 years ago. Back then, she had worn it like armor, something that made her feel powerful and beautiful. Now it clung to her like a taunt, like she was daring me to follow through on my ultimatum. "I didn't find an apartment yet," she said without bothering to look at me. "I didn't feel like rushing into anything." "You had a week," I said firmly. "This isn't a surprise, Nicole." "I thought you might change your mind," she replied casually, like she was asking if I wanted Thai food or pizza for dinner. I walked into the dining room where the papers were still sitting exactly where I'd left them. The separation agreement remained untouched since Monday, except now it had been folded once across the middle. The crease ran directly through the line that read, "Effective date of separation," and I looked at the clock on the wall. It read 5:13 p.m. We were past the deadline. "Nicole," I said firmly, returning to where she stood, "you need to go." She stepped into the room and leaned against the doorframe, like this was just casual conversation between old friends. "I don't think you understand what happens if we go down this road," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of condescension. "Enlighten me," I said. She walked over slowly, like a predator circling its prey. Not threatening exactly, just sizing me up one final time. "You think I don't know how this ends? You'll get your sympathy, sure. You'll tell your sob story to your little design clients, cry to your family about what a terrible wife I was. Maybe you'll even rebound with someone who says all the right things to make you feel better about yourself." I stayed silent, letting her build toward whatever point she was trying to make. She leaned closer. "But you will break, Tyler. And when you do, you'll crawl back looking for some version of me that you miss. And I won't be there waiting for you." "That's the point," I said without hesitation. "That you won't be there." She stepped back, her eyes narrowing as my words hit their mark. "Wow, you're really serious about this. I thought this was just a phase. You getting bold for once in your life." I pointed toward the front door. "Take your suitcase. I've already changed the locks on the garage and disabled your key fob. If you're not gone in 20 minutes, I'm calling my lawyer tonight." Her jaw clenched tight. "You think you're some big man now? Threatening me with lawyers?" "No," I said calmly. "I think I'm a man who finally knows exactly who he married." She stared at me hard, then she laughed. A low, bitter, broken sound with no real humor in it whatsoever. Just pure venom concentrated into something that resembled laughter. "You know what's funny?" she said, her voice dripping with malice. "He didn't even mean anything to me. I just liked how easy he was, how uncomplicated he made everything feel." "Great," I said, opening the front door for her. "Tell that to your next landlord." She blinked hard, and I could see that my response had stung her more than anything else I'd said during this entire ordeal. Because Nicole had never imagined a version of this scenario where she completely lost control of the narrative. She had always seen herself as the one who would get to walk away gracefully while the other person begged for closure and explanations. She picked up her suitcase slowly, like she was moving underwater. Then she turned to look at me one last time, searching my face for any sign of weakness or hesitation. "You're going to regret this," she said with quiet certainty. "No," I said, holding the door open wide. "I'm going to remember this." She walked out without another word. She didn't slam the door or make any dramatic exit. She didn't even say goodbye. She just walked to her car, got in, and drove off into the night. I stood there alone in the quiet hum of the house that had finally stopped lying to me. The silence after she left wasn't peace. Not at first, anyway. It was the kind of quiet that presses in on you from all sides, heavy and lingering, settling into the furniture and crawling along the floorboards. It made the house feel bigger than it ever had before. Too big, too empty, too full of echoes from conversations that would never happen again. But slowly, gradually, that silence began to feel like oxygen. The walls stopped watching me with judgment. The air felt cleaner, lighter, like someone had finally opened windows that had been sealed shut for months. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't flinch when I heard the front door because it was locked. Because she wasn't coming back. I spent that weekend boxing up the rest of her things with methodical precision. Every blouse, every earring, every little souvenir from vacations that now felt like staged photo opportunities rather than genuine memories. I packed them all with surgical care. Not because I wanted revenge or to damage anything, but because I needed the space. Not just physical space in the house, but mental space in my head. She texted me on Sunday. "Nicole, I left something in the drawer by the bed. Don't throw it out." I didn't respond. A few hours later, another message appeared. "Nicole, are we really going to pretend like none of this matters to you?" That one stayed unread. Then came the phone call. One ring, then two, then it went to voicemail. She tried again on Monday and Tuesday, each attempt more desperate than the last. By Wednesday, the tone of her messages had changed completely. "Nicole, fine. You want to play the victim? Go ahead. But don't act surprised when I tell people the real story about what happened between us." There it was. Exactly what I'd been expecting. She had lost control of the situation behind closed doors, so now she was going to take it public. She was going to reframe the entire narrative, reshape reality into something she could live with, something she could sell to anyone who would listen. She'd always had that particular talent, the ability to twist events until they reflected the version of herself she wanted the world to see. But this time, I was ready for it. I had already been to a lawyer weeks ago. I'd already opened a new bank account, transferred my half of our shared funds, and shut down our joint credit card. The lawyer had copies of all the texts, screenshots from her second phone, receipts from her hotel visits, and even photographs of the journal entries I'd found. She didn't know it yet, but she was essentially firing blanks. All bark, no ground to stand on whatsoever. The more she tried to spin the story in her favor, the more tangled up she was going to become in her own lies. Our mutual friend Danielle reached out to me on Thursday, her voice shaky and uncertain. "Hey, is it true what Nicole said about you?" "What did she say?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea of the direction this conversation was heading. That you locked her out of the house? That you took her money and cut her off after she confessed she was going through depression? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Of course that's what she had told people. Of course she had painted herself as the victim of my supposed cruelty. "She didn't confess anything, Danielle," I said calmly. "She got caught cheating with multiple people over several months, showed zero remorse about it, and called our entire marriage a pit stop in her life. She didn't get cut off. She got exposed." There was silence on the line. Then Danielle sighed heavily. "She's telling people you were controlling, that you tracked her every move and watched her like some kind of stalker. She left her second phone unlocked in her car," I explained. "The one she used to coordinate her affairs. I didn't track anything. I just found evidence of what she was already doing." Danielle hesitated. "Do you have proof of what you're saying?" "I'll send it to you," I said. And I did. I sent her the text messages, the hotel receipts, the audio clip that had started this whole confrontation. Everything except the journal entries. Some things, even when exposed, should probably stay private. Later that night, Nicole tried to contact me one final time. "Nicole, you just couldn't let it die quietly, could you?" That was it. That was her final message to me. No threats, no apologies, no last-ditch attempts to salvage anything. Just the bitter echo of someone who had finally understood that she wasn't going to be able to rewrite the ending of this story. But I didn't reply to her last message. That was the moment when everything truly turned around. The silence wasn't avoidance anymore. It was power. For the first time since this entire nightmare had begun, I wasn't reacting to her anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next lie, or the next manipulation, or the next carefully curated half-truth dropped like bait into a conversation I didn't want to have. I was finally done playing the game entirely. People started reaching out to me quietly, carefully, like they were stepping around a crater that had been left behind. Her cousin messaged me, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "She's been telling everyone you were emotionally unavailable for years," he wrote. But honestly, I always wondered why she looked bored out of her mind at family gatherings. I didn't say anything at the time, but I'm sorry, man. Others followed in the days after that. Her old coworker, our neighbor, even her own sister Lauren, who I'd always suspected didn't buy into Nicole's perfect girl image the way everyone else seemed to. Lauren's voice cracked when she called me. "I tried to talk to her about what she was doing," she said. "She just blames everyone else for everything. She says you made her feel invisible, but Tyler, I saw her change over the years. She used to light up around you and then she just started treating you like a doormat." I said nothing during that call, just let the silence say what I couldn't find words for. Nicole had spent years building a version of herself that relied entirely on being adored and admired. Her charm wasn't genuine warmth, it was control. Her smile was a shield, her laugh was a weapon. She knew exactly how to wear affection like a costume when it served her purposes. But now the mask was finally slipping. The truth was leaking out through the cracks, and with every person who reached out to me, I felt another weight lift from my shoulders. The house felt different too. That constant tension that used to hum under every conversation, every glance across the dinner table, every moment of supposed intimacy, that was completely gone. I was sleeping again. I was eating regular meals. I was remembering what music sounded like when it wasn't being played just to drown out the sound of a cold, dying marriage. I even started unpacking some things I hadn't touched in years. Old sketchbooks from college, my guitar that had been gathering dust in the closet, letters from my dad that I'd saved over the years. Things she had never had patience for, things she'd once dismissively called time wasters when I wasn't obsessing over her moods and whereabouts instead. Then this happened. It was a Friday evening, and I came back from the gym to find her car parked in my driveway. She was sitting on the front steps wearing a hoodie pulled over her head, her face pale and drawn. There was a plastic bag at her feet, and she was just sitting there like the last few weeks hadn't happened at all. I stepped out of my car and walked up to the house slowly. "You can't be here," I said firmly. "I just wanted to talk," she mumbled, not looking up at me. "I don't," I replied. She finally looked up, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I saw something that almost resembled uncertainty in her expression. But it wasn't regret, and it certainly wasn't pain. It was confusion, like she still couldn't figure out how I had managed to slip through her grip so completely. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," she said quietly. "Not all the way through." "I know you didn't," I said. She stood up slowly, looking smaller somehow than she had just weeks before. "I've got nowhere to go tonight." "You have a phone full of options," I said without hesitation. "Pick one." She flinched at that response, the casual cruelty of it hitting her exactly where I'd intended it to. She picked up her bag slowly, like she was moving underwater. "Do you really hate me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her for a long, hard moment, really studying her face in the dim light from the porch. "I don't feel anything anymore," I said. That hurt her more than rage ever could have. She nodded once, a quick, sharp movement, then walked to her car without saying another word. No goodbyes, no last attempts at manipulation, no final dramatic speeches. Just the sound of a car door shutting and taillights disappearing into the darkness. I went inside and locked the door behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was truly home. The final weeks after she left weren't marked by dramatic closures or emotional reckonings. There was no final text message, no long attempts to rewrite the narrative of what had happened between us. Just absence, long, echoing stretches of it, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again without interference. Honestly, that silence became sacred to me. It was something I protected and cherished in ways I hadn't expected. The day the official divorce papers were ready, I signed them without any ceremony whatsoever. I didn't play music to mark the occasion, didn't drink alcohol to celebrate, didn't call anyone to announce that it was finally over. I just drove to my lawyer's office, sat in the same stiff leather chair I'd been sitting in for weeks, and put my name on the dotted line. Her lawyer, whom I never met face to face but imagined wore the same smug mask she always did, had tried to negotiate a few things at the last minute. She wanted to revisit the division of assets, push back on the clause about her journal never going public, and she even had the audacity to suggest that I should acknowledge some kind of emotional harm in return for her cooperation. I declined every single one of her requests firmly. Every bluff she tried to run crumbled the moment real consequences entered the picture. That was Nicole's greatest weakness. She had never expected to be held accountable for anything in her entire life. But the real turning point came a few days after I signed the papers. A package arrived at my front door with no return label, just my name written in her distinctive handwriting. Like she couldn't help but make even this final gesture look personal and intimate. Inside the package were a few carefully chosen items. There was the hoodie she'd stolen the night she left, her wedding ring placed in the little black jewelry box we'd never found a use for, and a note that was short and rushed looking. No salutation, no signature, just a few lines scrawled across a piece of paper. "I hope you find what you were missing. I wasn't it." I stared at that note for a long time, reading it over and over again. There it was, her final act of control disguised as closure. A note that sounded profound and meaningful on the surface, but was really just another deflection, another attempt to rewrite history. Like she was trying to leave me with the idea that I was the one who had gone looking for something else, that she had just happened to fall into someone else's bed while I was distracted by my own shortcomings. But I didn't respond to it. I didn't need to respond. Instead, I boxed everything up, the ring, the hoodie, the note, all of it, and drove 2 towns over to drop it all off at a donation center. I wanted it completely out of my house and out of my story, because I hadn't been missing anything. She was the one who had been missing something. She always had been. In trying to fill that emptiness with strangers and secrets and elaborate deceptions, she had systematically hollowed out the one person who would have stood by her even when she didn't deserve it. But I wasn't hollow anymore. I was rebuilding quietly and patiently, not with vengeance, not with bitterness, but with clarity that felt like fresh air after being trapped in a smoke-filled room for months. I started going for walks, real ones, not those fake walks around the block I used to take just to escape the tension in my own house. I talked to my neighbors for the first time in years. I reorganized my garage, planted something small in the backyard just to see if I still knew how to care for something and watch it grow. It turns out I did know how. I always had. She just had never seen it, or maybe she had never cared to look. Either way, I had started writing again. Not this exact story, not exactly, but pieces of it. Things I had learned through this whole ordeal, things I had lost, and things I would never allow to happen again. Because while she had walked away thinking she had somehow won this battle, I had walked away with something she would never have: genuine peace. It's been 6 months now since everything ended. Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like when she wasn't lying to me. Sometimes I forget what it felt like to sleep beside someone and not wonder if they were thinking about someone else while lying next to me. I forget in a way that feels like healing. Not like denial or avoidance, but like healthy distance. Like finally being far enough away from the wreckage to stop inhaling the smoke. The house is different now. It's lighter, though not necessarily cleaner. Nicole had always obsessed over having a spotless kitchen and perfectly arranged living spaces. But it feels freer now, less staged and museum-like. It's more of a home now and less of a showpiece designed to impress people who might be watching. There are still traces of her presence here and there throughout the house. A chipped coffee mug she left behind, a small burnt spot on the windowsill from one of her old candles that I never bothered to fix. I don't remove those traces because they're not painful anymore. They're just reminders, not of her specifically, but of lessons learned. Like mile markers on a road I'm not driving down anymore. People keep asking me how I'm doing, usually with that particular tone that suggests I should be better now by some predetermined timeline. Like healing is supposed to be a straight line with a finish flag you cross when you're officially over it. I tell them the truth. Some days are better than others. Some days I remember how easy it had become to get used to being unloved, to accept crumbs of affection as if they were full meals. Some days I actually want to call her, not to reconnect or to try to fix anything, but just to ask why. Not the rehearsed why she had given me during our confrontations, not the pretty version she had shared with her friends and family. I want the real reason, the ugly one, the one that only comes out when someone is finally being completely honest with themselves about their motivations. But I don't call her, because her silence has become more honest than her words ever were. I never got the grand apology I probably deserved. No handwritten letter begging for another chance. No doorstep confession with tears and genuine remorse. No admission of what she had really done to our marriage, or how she had systematically unraveled it like it was nothing but yarn that could be discarded when she got bored. She didn't want forgiveness. She had wanted freedom without consequences. And now I'm giving her both of those things. I'm letting her be someone else's chaos, someone else's regret, someone else's cautionary tale. I've got other plans for my life. A few weeks ago, I met someone new. Not met in a romantic sense. We're not dating or anything like that. We just shared a conversation at a coffee shop and she laughed at one of my jokes. Not a polite social laugh, but a real one that came from genuine amusement. Something about that simple interaction cracked open a little window in my chest, the kind that lets fresh air in after a long, stale season indoors. It reminded me that I still have something worthwhile to give to another person, that I wasn't the broken one in my marriage. Nicole didn't cheat because I had somehow failed as a husband. She cheated because she had never learned how to be emotionally full on her own. She thought love was something you took from other people to feel better about yourself, not something you built together to create something whole and lasting. She had been looking for adrenaline and excitement while I had been offering peace and stability. She had wanted fireworks while I was trying to build a home. But now that house is mine again, not because I kept the physical building, but because I reclaimed every room, every memory, every quiet morning where I make my own coffee and sit in my own kitchen and simply breathe without walking on eggshells. So, if you're reading this and you're still in the middle of it, still trapped in the gaslighting and blame games, still enduring the slow drip of betrayal that makes you question your own sanity, I'll leave you with this hard-earned wisdom. You don't have to rage and scream at them. You don't have to throw things or make dramatic speeches about how much they've hurt you. You just have to walk out of the fire they've created and close the door firmly behind you. Let them burn in the world they built through their lies and deception and go build something infinitely better for yourself. Because the truth is, people like Nicole don't change. They don't wake up one day and suddenly develop empathy or integrity. They just move on to the next person they can manipulate, the next relationship they can slowly poison with their need for constant validation and excitement. They leave a trail of destruction behind them, but they never look back long enough to understand the damage they've caused. But you have the power to walk away from that destruction and refuse to let it define the rest of your story. You have the strength to rebuild yourself into someone stronger, wiser, and more careful about who you let into your heart. The silence after betrayal isn't empty. It's full of possibility. It's the sound of your life finally belonging to you again, free from the constant anxiety of wondering what lie you'll discover next, or what fresh humiliation is waiting around the corner. I'm not the same man I was when this all started. I'm not the passive, endlessly forgiving person who accepted crumbs of affection and convinced himself they were enough. I'm someone who knows his worth now, someone who understands the difference between love and manipulation, between genuine partnership and elaborate performance. And if Nicole ever decides she wants to tell her version of this story to anyone who will listen, that's fine with me. Because the people who matter, the ones worth keeping in your life, they can usually tell the difference between truth and carefully constructed fiction. They can see through the victim act and the crocodile tears. She taught me something valuable, even if she never intended to. She taught me that you can survive the complete destruction of everything you thought you knew about love and trust. You can walk through that fire and come out the other side not just intact, but stronger than you ever imagined possible. The house is quiet now, but it's a good kind of quiet. It's the sound of peace, of a life finally aligned with my values instead of constantly compromised by someone else's lies. It's the sound of mornings without anxiety, evenings without dread, and nights of actual rest instead of wondering where she really was and who she was really with. Sometimes people ask me if I regret anything about how I handled the situation. The answer is no. I regret trusting her for as long as I did. I regret not seeing the signs earlier, but I don't regret how I chose to end it. I don't regret refusing to play her games or beg for scraps of her attention. I don't regret walking away with my dignity intact. Because in the end, that's what matters most. Not whether you can force someone to love you the way you deserve to be loved, but whether you have enough self-respect to walk away when they prove they're incapable of it. The story ends here, but my life, the real one, the honest one, the one where I don't have to wonder if the person sleeping next to me is planning their next betrayal, that story is just beginning. And it's going to be so much better than anything I could have built with someone who saw our marriage as nothing more than a pit stop on her way to something else.